Hello. I did the book, The Autobiography of Martin Luther King Jr. So, this book is obviously his autobiography, so it's his life, his story. It was edited by Claiborne Carson. I can't remember the year. Um, so, in this book, he starts out telling about his life as a young person. Then he moves into, throughout the book, yeah, obviously it starts with when he was really young and then up all the way up into his when he was killed. Um, so Martin Luther King Jr. was a civil rights, the one of the, I guess, the most influential civil rights movement leader. He pretty much led the way for blacks, for African Americans to gain more freedoms in America that they were unable to get before. So he witnesses discrimination from an early age. He um, came from a well to do family. They weren't rich, but they weren't poor. They were better off than a lot of African American families at that time. It talks about how he went to Boston. He earned a college degree there. He ended up moving back. He met his wife Coretta in Boston, and they moved back to Selma, to Alabama, where Coretta was actually from. Um, they were a faithful family. Their faith was the utmost important to them. He also had to experience a lot of the same things that other African Americans had to experience at that time. He had to sit on the back of the bus. He had to follow all the segregation laws of Alabama, and that made him nervous coming back to Alabama because he knew the segregation issues that were going on here. And he wasn't having to experience all that in Boston. So when he had to come back, he didn't have to, but when he came back here, when he chose to come back here, he knew what he was walking into, and he knew that it was going to take a lot to rid the South of all the issues that were going on with civil rights at that time, particularly with blacks and African Americans. Um, he also talks about in one part of the book how he had a friend who was a white boy that lived down the street from him, and he talks about how the little boy's dad ended up pretty much not he wasn't allowed to be friends with Martin Luther King Jr. anymore because of the fact that he was black, and he did not want his little boy to be associated with a black child. So I thought that was interesting and sad at the same time. He witnessed a lot of police brutality, which for me was a connection to kind of what's going on nowadays. I feel like we're kind of seeing history repeat itself a little bit with some of the Black Lives Matter movement and the civil rights movement. It kind of correlates together a little bit. I don't agree with all of it, but he also talks about his experience with how he followed Gandhi and how he eventually actually went and met Gandhi. And that was a very influential person in his life that helped him figure out who he wanted to be and how he wanted to live his life and the path that he wanted to follow. His religion was very important to him. He became a pastor at a Montgomery church, and him and Coretta have 4 kids. They, like I said, they lived their faith was very influential to them, even to the point where he was threatened all the time. Once the Rosa Parks thing happened with the bus, he really began trying to be more active in changing the way that blacks were treated in the South. So after that happened, he started receiving a lot of death threats. He was receiving He received a phone call that his house was going to be burned down. His house actually was bombed. And my favorite part of the book was after his house was bombed, even though they took that from him, he told his followers not to retaliate because that's not the kind of example he wanted to show people. He wanted to show people that there is good in the world, and his way of doing that was to tell them don't retaliate with this. Like, they burned my house down, but we're better than that, and we're going to show them better than that. And so I thought that was really noble of him. And speaking of noble, he actually won the Nobel Peace Prize award later in life. Um, let's see. My standard for this is that I have chosen to do with my lesson plan is a fourth grade standard. I struggled a little bit more on picking a standard for this. Well, I didn't struggle with picking a standard. I struggled with picking an activity. The standard for it is analyze the modern civil rights movement to determine the social, political, and economic impact on Alabama. Uh, the activity is a little bit of a struggle for me with this one, but we'll see how it goes. I, once again, did not read the entire book, front page, back. I did listen to the entire audiobook. Once again, it's just easier for me to comprehend it by listening instead of actually reading it in a book in front of me. So that's it. Thanks.